WikiLeaks.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The online whistleblower WikiLeaks website has released close to 400,000 classified U.S. documents on the Iraq War, the largest intelligence leak in U.S. history and the largest internal account of any war on public record. The disclosure provides a trove of new evidence on the violence, torture, and suffering that's befallen Iraq since the 2003 U.S. invasion. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange unveiled the new documents on Saturday.
In our release of these 400,000 documents about the Iraq War, the intimate detail of that war from the US perspective, we hope to correct some of that attack on the truth. We have seen that there are approximately 15,000 never previously documented or known cases of civilians who have been killed by violence in Iraq. Iraq, as we can see, was a bloodbath on every corner of that country. The stated aims for going into that war of improving the human rights situation, improving the rule of law, did not eventuate. And in terms of raw numbers of people arbitrarily killed, worsened the situation in Iraq.
Despite U.S. claims to the contrary, the war logs show the Pentagon kept tallies of civilian deaths in Iraq. The group Iraq Body Count says the files contain evidence of an additional 15,000 previously unknown Iraqi civilian casualties. The number is likely far higher, as the war logs omit many instances where U.S. forces killed Iraqi civilians, including the U.S. assault on Fallujah in 2004. The war logs also show the U.S. imposed a formal policy to ignore human rights abuses committed by the Iraqi military. Under an order known as Frago 242, issued in June 2004, coalition troops were barred from investigating any violations committed by Iraqi troops against other Iraqis. Hundreds of cases of killings, torture, and rape at the hands of the Iraqi troops were ignored. New evidence of other possible U.S. war crimes has also emerged. According to the war logs, a U.S. Apache helicopter killed 2 Iraqis in February of 2007, even though they were trying to surrender. The helicopter unit was the same that killed 12 people and wounded 2 children in a July 2007 attack captured on video and leaked by WikiLeaks earlier this year. This is the moment the U.S. forces first opened fire in that attack.
Have individuals with weapons. For radio. You're clear. All right, firing. Line here. Let's stay line out. Let me know when you gather. We'll shoot. Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260s.
Come on, fire. Hey, Roger. Keep shoot. Keep shoot.
Bushmaster, 2 things. Bushmaster, 2 things. We need to move time now.
All right, we just engaged all 8 individuals.
That July 12, 2007 attack was the one that killed the 2 Reuters employees, the videographer Namir Noor Eldin and his driver, Saeed Shama, the father of 4. The logs also show U.S. gunships killed even more civilians just 4 days later. On July 16, 2007, 14 civilians were reported dead in a U.S. attack in eastern Baghdad. The documents also reveal that the private military firm Blackwater has killed more Iraqi civilians than previously known. There are reports of 14 separate shooting incidents involving Blackwater forces, resulting in the deaths of 10 civilians and the wounding of 7 others. That doesn't include the Nisour Square massacre that killed 17 civilians. A third of the shootings occurred while Blackwater forces were guarding U.S. diplomats. Of over 832 deaths recorded at checkpoints between 2004 and 2009, an estimated 681 were civilians, according to the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London. 50 families were fired on and 30 children were killed. The disclosure marks the biggest leak in U.S. history, far more than the 91,000 Afghanistan war logs WikiLeaks released this summer. 76,000 of them they have released so far. WikiLeaks says it still plans to release the other 15,000 withheld Afghan war documents. An Army intelligence analyst, Bradley Manning, has been in prison since May when he was arrested on charges of leaking the classified material. The Obama administration's lashed out at WikiLeaks for the latest disclosures. Pentagon spokesperson Jeff Morrell said WikiLeaks is endangering U.S. troops.
The bottom line is our forces are still very much in danger here as a result of this exposure, given the fact that our tactics, techniques, and procedures are exposed in these documents, and our enemies are undoubtedly going to try to use them against us and making their jobs even more difficult and dangerous.
Well, for more, we're joined now for the rest of the hour by three guests. From Washington, D.C., Prothup Chatterjee, senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, an investigative journalist who's written extensively about contractors employed in the global war on terror. He's written 2 books on the subject, Iraq Inc. and Halliburton's Army. He's written about the war logs for The Guardian of London. Here in New York, we're joined by Nir Rosen, an independent journalist who's covered the Iraq War since 2003. He's a fellow at the New York University Center on Law and Security and author of the new book, Aftermath, Following the Bloodshed of America's Wars in the Muslim World. And joining us from London is David Lee. He's the investigations editor at The Guardian newspaper of London. The Guardian was one of the media outlets given advance copies of the Iraq war logs and has published an extensive series on its website. David Lee, let's begin with you. Why don't you give us an overview of what this trove of almost 400,000 documents represents and says about Iraq?
It represents the raw material of history, and that's an immensely valuable thing to have because, as we all know, over the last 6 or 7 years of the invasion and occupation of Iraq, this has been accompanied in the usual way by propaganda, by spin, by the sanitized version. This is the unvarnished version. And, of course, what the unvarnished version does is confirm what many of us feared and what many journalists have attempted to report over the years, that Iraq became a bloodbath, a real bloodbath of unnecessary killings, of civilian slaughter, of torture, and of people being beaten to death.
Can you divide the documents into different categories, as the Guardian did? The different categories of killings, of torture, of who was involved with these, and begin with who wrote them. Explain what these war logs are.
These war logs are day by day, and in many cases hour by hour, field reports from information radioed in by small units out in the field. They really chart incidents, every single incident, and sometimes you'll see like 20 or 30 or 50 in a single day. They had then all been collated into an electronic archive. I think probably for the first time, this in Afghanistan have been the first American military adventures in which this kind of archive has been collated and made available to other people in the US military, which is, of course, how it's come to be leaked. What it contains of significance is 3 different types of material, in the sense that we didn't really know these things before. First of all, that at least 15,000 more civilians have been identifiably killed and are recorded in these logs. There are many other civilians who've been killed who aren't recorded there, of course, but that increases the figures. And bodies, independent bodies like the Iraq Body Count, the London-based private group, have pinned down those 15,000 extra by wading through all these documents. The second thing it documents is really brutal events in which the laws of war, as we commonly understood them, seem to have been overtaken by technology, air power, and asymmetric warfare. The classic case in here was of a helicopter, the Apache helicopter, which later went on to shoot and kill Reuters employees. It describes how men on the ground were trying to surrender. It radioed back to base for advice, and extraordinarily, the base lawyer said, "You cannot surrender to an aircraft. Go ahead and kill them." So it went ahead and killed them.
I mean, that's an astounding part of the story. That part of the story, David, is an astounding part of the story, that these men held up their hands to a plane overhead, to a helicopter. And in all these cases, the soldiers in the planes, they call back to base. They are not rogue. They are getting permission. And a lawyer says you cannot surrender to a helicopter, so they could go ahead and kill them.
That's exactly the point. The helicopter crew don't seem to have been trigger happy at all. They were pretty concerned. They radio back to base, these men are trying to surrender, what do we do? And they're told more than once, they can't surrender, you should go ahead and kill them. So what we see is orders coming from a high level. And that plays into the third new aspect in these documents, which is that they detail literally hundreds of times. I think there's more than 900 incidents of what they class as detainee abuse of people being tortured. And they're largely tortured by Iraqi security forces, but with the United States forces standing by, or in some cases, turning detainees over to people they know are going to torture them. And those orders seem to come from a high level. Again, you're not looking at individual rogue sadists in the US military. You're looking at orders.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion. David Lee, investigations editor at The Guardian. The Guardian is one of the media outlets that had advanced copies of the documents, got to see the documents, in addition to Der Spiegel in Germany, Al Jazeera, the New York Times, Le Monde in France. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. We'll be back in a minute.